I want to inject this this data store or this iPersist thing in. So how am I going to handle that in my unit test? Well, the goal of the unit test is to test the smallest chunk of code possible, right? I want to focus on person logic. I don't want to have anything to do with the data store's logic right now. So what do? Well, what we do is we're going to add a stub. Okay? So if I go to my test project, I right-click, and I'm going to say Add Reference, and I'm going to make it a reference to my solution. I'm going to add a reference to that interface right here. Right? So this is the project that contained my interface. Add a reference to that. And then what I'm also going to do is now if I dig into the references here, if I right-click on the interface reference, now I can say add a fake assembly. All right, clean the solution. Okay, so if I right-click on this, I say add a fake assembly. And notice two things. Under this fakes folder, we've added, and it's just a little XML file that says, hey, I've got this assembly called Fabricom Fiber Interfaces. It's fake assembly. And then what it actually did up here is, I'm not positive what's happening behind the scenes, but I suspect the Visual Studio created an actual DLL for you and implemented actual code for you, and you can actually go into the object browser and take a peek at what is done for you. Okay? Well, I'll leave that to you to do. So now how do we use that? Well, the first thing we have to do, we want to come up here and we want to do, I have to do the using of the fakes. I'm going to have to add a using for the interface, right? My test class has to understand what that interface is. And I'm going to have to add the using for the Fabricom Fiber Interface fakes. Okay? All right. So now, again, with this sort of the magic of my homework ahead of time, I'll save a little time, uncomment some code. Now, how do you go about using that? Okay, so now when we new up a person, right here, we want to use the constructor where we pass in this data store. What data store are we going to pass in? Well, that magic code is right here. Okay, so I say that this iPersist store equals new Fabricom Fiber, and then it's going to do a .fakes, and then it the naming convention is stub, and then the interface name. Okay, so I'm newing up a class that implements that iPersist interface. And then what I'm doing here is I'm creating an implementation of a method. Okay, the method that I showed you on the interface, this gets a little bit confusing. Let's see if I can shed a little light on that. Okay, so remember I've got my iPersist interface down here in the bottom pane. I'm trying to create an implementation of create. And then, so what is this business? Well, the naming convention for the generated code is for it to be the method name that you're implementing, followed by the type for the parameters. So create list of keys, value, pair of string is really get rid of the carets there, the comma, and the white spaces. That's your method name. So don't be thrown by that. I was a little thrown by that the first time. Okay, so the method accepts one parameter. I'm referring to it as ID. So if in here I wanted to return, ID plus 1, that would be perfectly reasonable. But I don't care. All I care about is that some ID is returned, right? I'm just going to hard code a 328. So I'm saying show me that when I run this thing, a 328 is returned. it'd probably be worthwhile to go in now to our person class and look at the create method. Look at what the create method looks like, right? So the create method just creates a key value pair, first with the first name as its value, last name as its value, and it calls the create method and sets the ID based on that. So super simple implementation, right? So back here on my fake, I've created a new implementation for the create. I said, no matter what, give me an ID of 328, and then set the first name, last name, call the create method, and then I'm going to check to see that they're equal. So when I run my unit test, person create test, passed. So it's all good. Okay, the last thing I want to do is talk about, so using a stub, that's appropriate for when you have nice interfaces defined, well-behaved things, but it's not appropriate for things like when you've got third-party dependencies or you're tied to somebody's code that decided not to use an interface or something like that. So that's when you've got to use the shim. Okay, so I've created, excuse me, I've created this assembly called fuzzy logic that's got a static method. So a static, you couldn't do a stub around either. It's got a static method called do fuzzy logic. Okay, and I'm trying to isolate my person class from that. And that was, what did I call that on? Okay, so I've got this mystery number method that when I call it, it calls fuzzy logic.doFuzzyLogic. Okay, I didn't pass fuzzy logic or anything like that in. This is a hard dependency. Person is absolutely dependent on fuzzy logic, right? So how do I test person, specifically the mystery number, without going into this fuzzy logic code? And that's where I'm going to use the shim. Okay, so it's a similar process over here to use the shim. So I go to my test references. I'm going to add a reference. This time I'm going to have to browse for it, and I had to compile it. So I go out to my DLL, select it, hit OK. Third-party assembly, same thing. Right-click, add fakes assembly. It's generating code for me. I need to reference that stuff. That's all I need. Okay, and then, so now what my test code is going to look like, and this is just a little more gnarly, but not too bad once you get used to it. Now what my test method is going to look like is this. Let me get that out of the way so we can see it. Okay, so now my test method looks like this, and here's the key. To be able to run a shim, you're going to have to be in this new thing called a shim's context. Okay, and the pattern for doing that is to wrap your test code in this using statement. So using shim's context.create. Okay, and then it's got a similar naming convention in that I've got the do fuzzy logic was the method name. It took two parameters of type int32. So that's going to be the name of my method. And what I want to do is provide a different implementation of do fuzzy logic. Now, if you recall, what I did in the do fuzzy logic is I took a parameter, 1 and 2, added them together, and then added 3. So it's just strange. I just did something strange, right? And if I go to my person test, though, I'm just going to make it 987. And the reason I did this, I just want to prove that no matter what I send in, I'm going to get 987 back. And the test running framework right now, how it's going to pull that off, is it's going to monitor for calls to the fuzzy logic.doFuzzyLogic. It's going to intercept them and forward them through this thing, this shim. Okay, so that's the magic of isolating. That's how you can isolate your code from hard dependencies. You could do this with system.datetime. Add a reference to system. Fake it, and then every call to system.datetime.now, you could put a shim in there so it always returned leap day, the year 2000, whatever. Do that with anything. So pretty cool.